On the 18th of June, 1986, a group of whitewater rafters were enjoying a day of near-perfect conditions on the waters of the Colorado River inside the Grand Canyon National Park. At around 9:30 a.m., they heard a loud boom and looked up to see something that none of them had ever expected to see. 2 aircraft, 1 helicopter and 1 plane, trailing smoke as they tumbled from the sky. The falling aircraft dropped out of sight. There were 2 loud crashes as they impacted the ground, and then twin columns of black smoke rose up into the sky. The rafters were left alone with the sounds of rushing water and nature once more, unable to process the fact that, out of nowhere, out of a clear blue sky, they had just seen 25 people fall to their deaths. The Grand Canyon is a sprawling river valley in Arizona with many incredible natural features. The gorge itself is up to 1.5 kilometers or 1 mile deep in places, eroded over the course of millennia, revealing beautiful and colorful geological formations. The canyon is over 400 kilometers or over 250 miles long, and up to 29 kilometers or 18 miles wide in places. The sheer scale of it is breathtaking, and it is considered one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. Since 1908, the canyon has been a national monument, and since 1919, a national park. Millions of people visit each year. Many tour along the rim to enjoy the incredible sights of the canyon, while others hike down into the interior in scorching temperatures. Still others opt to see the canyon from above, by taking one of the many sightseeing flights that pass over the sprawling landscape on a daily basis. These flights are, and for decades have been, big business. In the 1980s, as many as 400,000 people each year took a flight over the canyon, with around 40 different operators vying to provide this service. At 8:55 a.m. on the 18th of June, 1986, one such sightseeing flight took off from the Grand Canyon National Park Airport. It was a de Havilland Canada DHC-6 Twin Otter aircraft with 18 passengers and 2 crew on board, operated by Grand Canyon Airlines. About 20 minutes later, at 9:13 a.m., a Bell 206B helicopter took off from a small heliport adjacent to the national park. It was operated by on-demand tour company Helitech. There were 4 passengers and 1 pilot on board. It was a clear and beautiful day above the canyon, and both aircraft would be flying under visual flight rules. This means that, while they were in contact with air traffic controllers, they did not have to get clearance for each and every significant maneuver. Whatever movements the pilots of each aircraft wished to make, they were permitted to make them, just so long as they visually looked to see that the airspace they planned to move into was clear. Pilots were expected to maintain an awareness and a safe distance at all times from any other aircraft operating in their vicinity. Neither flight carried a flight data or cockpit voice recorder on board. Recorders were not mandatory at the time for small, sightseeing flights. As such, there is no record of the exact route each flight took, or what was said by the crews on board. However, at around 9:30 a.m., the 2 aircraft collided in the airspace above Tonto Plateau. The helicopter's rotor blades tore into the Twin Otter aircraft, shattering explosively. Both aircraft suffered catastrophic damage and were sent plummeting from the sky. Spilled fuel erupted into 2 fiercely burning fires that blazed so hot that rivers of molten aluminium flowed downhill from the crash sites. A National Park Service helicopter was nearby. The pilot heard a report of a possible crash over the radio. Believing that there might be survivors, he raced to pick up medical supplies from a nearby heliport and then headed for the scene. His haste was unnecessary. Not a single person from either aircraft had survived the impact and the fires which followed. 20 people on board the Twin Otter and 5 on board the Bell 206B lost their lives. Over the next few days, the human remains that could be retrieved were removed from the plateau, An investigation began with the goal of answering one simple question. Why had the pilots of the two aircraft not seen and avoided one another? The weather conditions could not be to blame, as it was a perfectly clear day. Likewise, the pilots were adequately trained and experienced, had all rested well, and were not intoxicated or suffering from any relevant medical conditions. There was no sign at all that either aircraft had malfunctioned. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, looked to other possibilities. The helicopter pilot had been a new hire, with only 5 days on the job, but at the same time, he was not inexperienced. His previous job had also seen him flying a similar helicopter along a similar route. The possibility that one or other of the aircraft had visually blended in with the blue sky or orange rock below was examined and discounted. It was even considered whether one of the pilots had been wearing a baseball cap that might have limited his field of vision. But again, this was not found to be a relevant factor. None of these things had caused the accident. So what had? The NTSB identified some possible contributing factors. It was found that one of the pilots on board the Twin Otter had accrued a large number of flight hours in the month before the accident. He was flying within the set legal limits for pilots operating sightseeing flights. But were these limits appropriate? The NTSB noted that sightseeing flights were actually more demanding than some other types of flight, as they were conducted under visual flight rules, at relatively low altitudes, and without the use of autopilot. Yet pilots conducting sightseeing flights were permitted to fly more hours with less rest than pilots carrying out point-to-point flights. While the pilot involved had complied with all relevant guidelines, he might still have been fatigued. Meanwhile, the lone pilot on board the Bell 206B helicopter might have been distracted. As well as piloting the aircraft, it was also a routine part of his job to provide some narration and point out key sights on the ground below to his passengers. To do this, he would turn his head to one side to look back at the passengers and speak loudly over the sound of the helicopter's rotors. The crash had taken place at a point when the pilot of the helicopter should not have been providing any narration, but it was possible that he may have been answering a question or otherwise speaking with his passengers. If he had been doing so, he would have been distracted and turned to one side with a limited view of the airspace around the helicopter. Fatigue and distraction may have caused the crash, but there was also a wider systemic issue. Many tours operated over the Grand Canyon, and the majority all passed over the same small number of landmarks. For this reason, though the airspace over the canyon was vast, there were several points and corridors where it could be relatively congested. Most operators conformed to a system whereby different aircraft and different operators flew at different altitudes, ensuring vertical separation. But this system was basic, informal, and not enforced. The issue of congestion became even more prominent in April 1986, 2 months before the crash. In an attempt to reduce complaints from hikers in the canyon below about the noise of aircraft passing overhead, some operators had altered their flight routes. Helitech was one such operator. Their new route was similar to the route taken by Grand Canyon Airlines, something that would reduce the amount of aircraft noise elsewhere in the park, but which unfortunately led to the two aircraft having intersecting flight paths. In an effort to reduce noise pollution, safety had been compromised. The accident prompted significant changes in the way that tours were operated over the Grand Canyon. Companies operating scenic flights now had to work in accordance with the same flight hour limits as any other airline. They were also required to plan, file, and stick to specific routes that had been approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. At the same time, the minimum standards for training, certification, and reporting for sightseeing flights across the nation were raised. To this day, air tours over the Grand Canyon continue. It is possible to view the natural wonder of this unique landscape from any number of small aircraft. The airspace remains a complicated and contested one, but the changes to safety procedures made in 1986 have improved its management significantly. There has not been another mid-air collision above the Grand Canyon since June 1986.